So in today's video, I'm going to show you really quickly how to create abstract watercolor artwork like this in Procreate. As usual, I'll list all the brushes and textures I'm using for this in the description below. So before I start painting, I want to work out my color palette first, and I'm going to use a website to help me with that. And the one I recommend using is called Color Hunt, and I think I want to use this color palette for this video. So to save it, I'm just going to take a screenshot, then I can tap on the screenshot, and I can use my finger to pull the edges and sort of crop it onto the color palette. There we go. After that, I'm going to go to Done, and I'm going to do Copy and Delete. And that'll delete the screenshot, but I still have it copied, and then I can paste it into Procreate. So I'll make a blank layer, and I'll make sure it's above the paper texture. Then I can go to the wrench, and then paste. I'll use the freeform scale to kind of squish it and stretch it, and then I'll put it up in the corner so it's not in my way. And to start painting, I'm going to do a long press and grab one of those colors. I'll make a blank layer, and I'm going to make sure everything from now on is below the paper texture because I want to have that effect. For the brush, I'm going to use the abstract round, and I'll start with a very light pressure and just rough out an oval like this. And then I'll press harder to fill in the center, and with this brush, it gets lighter the harder I press, and this helps add some nice variation to it. After that, I'm going to grab the water blender, and I'll use this to kind of smooth everything out, but I don't want to make it too smooth. I like it to have a little bit of roughness to it. And sometimes you might kind of blend beyond the edge, but it's easy because you can just cut it back with the eraser brush. And this next step here is very optional, but I want to show you how to give this a hard kind of watercolor edge, and it's really easy to do. I'm just going to grab the selection tool, set to automatic. I'll just tap out here to select the white area, then I'll feather it out just a little bit, and I'll zoom in here so you can see this better. I've just created a selection in the white area that's feathered a little bit. Then I can go to my adjustments, curves, and if I set it to gamma, and kind of control this blue node over here, and I just drag it to the right, you can see it makes the edge quite a bit darker. And if I zoom out, you can see all the edges of this have this dark effect. And at this point, I'm going to move on and create a bunch of different kind of oval and blob shapes like this, just using all the different colors on the color palette. It's really important though that each shape is on its own separate layer, because we're going to move these around in a minute. And there we go. I think that's enough blobs for this. And as I mentioned, I did each one on its own separate layer. So what I'm going to do next is use the arrow tool to kind of reposition, maybe rotate some of these shapes, and just find a nice arrangement that has some balance to it. And once you're happy with how your arrangement looks, you can merge all those shapes together onto one layer, and then switch off the color palette. Now, as you can see, some of my shapes are kind of touching, and I'd like to have them kind of blending together, and that's what I'll show you how to do next. So for that, I'm going to switch my brush to the water blender. I'm going to make sure my layer with all my shapes is selected, and I'm going to start by using the blender at a small enough size to kind of fit between there, and I'm just going to blend this and work it back and forth. And there we go, this blending looks pretty good. And if you're happy with it, you could just leave it as it is and move on and do the other ones. But there's one more kind of subtle trick I want to show you. So first, grab the selection tool and set it to freehand. And just select the area here around where we blended. There we go. I'll feather out this selection a tiny bit, just like 4%. Then I can go to my adjustments, liquefy, set it to crystals. I'll use it at a pretty big size. And you can see if I sort of scrub this around, it puts a lot of these interesting lines in the blending. And I think it has a really nice look, so I'm going to do this to all the blending. And I forgot to mention this, but this crystals liquefy tool is directional. So that means you can aim it depending on how you're laying down the pencil. So for example, if I want to shoot it that way, I just lay it like this. And if I want it to come the other way, just do it like that. And next, I'm going to go through and use the same technique on all the areas where the blobs are touching. And once our blending is finished, we can move on and finish this up by adding some surface patterns. Now, of course, there's going to be endless varieties of surface patterns, so I'm just going to show you how to do 3 of my favorites. The first pattern I want to show you is called drips, and I think it'll look good in this area. And I'll make it on a blank layer above our colored blobs. For the color, I'll choose a red tone like this, and any brush could work, but I'm going to use the fine liner pen. And I'm just going to create a sort of network of different red shapes like this, and I'll change the color a couple times just so they're not all the same. After that, I'll use the arrow tool to kind of scale and position these a little bit better. There we go. Then I'll go to Gaussian blur, and I'll soften these up just a little bit. There we go. After that, I'll go back to liquify. It's still set to crystals, but I'm going to use it at a smaller size, and I'll just kind of scribble this around to disrupt these a little bit. And then I'll finish them up by going back to my brush, still set to the fine liner pen, and basically painting red on top of these again, just so I have some kind of soft edges along with some harder edges. And I think this looks really good, but maybe the colors are a bit too bright. So if you want to fix that, you can just set the layer transparency mode to multiply. The next pattern I'll show you how to paint is what I call inky dots. And for that, I'll make another blank layer, and I'll choose a really deep indigo tone like this. I'll use the same fine liner pen, and I'm just going to do this kind of pointillism oval shape like this. And just like I did with the drips, I'll use the arrow tool to scale and position this a little bit better. There we go. I think I'll also set this one to multiply as well. And then I want to add an effect that I call selection blending. Basically, in some of these areas where the dots are occurring on the blob, I want them to be a little bit blurry. So to do that, I'll grab the selection tool set to freehand. I'll just select the areas where they overlap. Then I can go to Gaussian blur and just soften them like this. And the last detail is the simplest one. I'm just going to add some line details. So for that, I'll make another blank layer above everything. But this time, I want to use a sort of scratchy pen brush. And I'll just use this to add some lines and swirls wherever I feel like it. And just like that, this abstract art is finished. As I mentioned, I just covered a few of my favorite techniques in this video, but this painting style has unlimited possibilities with all the different things you can experiment with. As always, if you think I've earned it, please give this video a like, and here are 2 more watercolor tutorials I think you'll love to watch next.